eliminate the catalytic converters, well, from an 06 Cadillac CTS, but the truth is this is my cherry red 49 Chev project. And so the biggest reason that we're removing them is because 49 Chevs don't have catalytic converters. The next biggest reason is because one of them is burnt out or plugged up is what happens. Because I got caught in a snowstorm, my wife and I were driving through Saskatchewan. There's no towns for miles around. It develops an engine mist, and I carry an OBD reader with me. So I plug it in and I say, sure enough, it's missing on one of the cylinders on the left bank. What can you do? You keep driving. By the time we got to Edmonton and got to where I could put a new coil in, the catalytic converter was plugged up and messed up. So they're expensive, especially if you get decent ones. I don't know, there's some cheap ones out there, but it kind of looks like, would they even fit?
Oh, there's a package here for you.
Sweetest wife ever. She runs to the front porch when she hears the delivery man coming. She grabs the package and runs it downstairs to my desk and opens it up to make sure. I think she just opens it because she likes opening packages. Maybe I'm supposed to learn something. And this pair of very important little spacers that'll go on the downstream O2 sensors, and they will keep that pesky little service engine light from coming on.
So the other reason now, the third reason that we're doing this project, and this will be, irrelevant for most people, is that I lengthened the wheelbase of the Cadillac to put it under the 49 Chev 1 inch. So we are going to eliminate the catalytic converter, put in a dummy pipe, right, or just a regular exhaust pipe instead, and make it 1 inch longer so that the regular manufactured exhaust system can work, and it'll work great. It'll be a little bit louder. So there's a few steps to this. The first one, and probably the biggest one, at least it was for me so far, is taking the catalytic converters off. And my engine is a 3.6 liter V6. On both sides, I broke one bolt, messed up a nut. It's really difficult to get in there. You might get a wrench on there, but you can't get any leverage on it. And of course, everything's so tight in there. There's wires and pipes and stuff everywhere. So I had to make a socket for one of the bolts sticking upright. And so I welded this socket. It's a 5/8 old 5/8 impact wrench onto a 15 millimeter socket so that I could put it on the bolt like this and slowly turn the bolt off from underneath. Wrecked a socket doing it, but there's more where these came from. So you just have to do what you can. Of course, you use penetrating fluid and you tap them and you knock them, and you might even use a torch and heat them up a little bit or whatever. Or some guys say you should warm the engine up so that the exhaust is hot, because then you can not only get the nuts off easier, but you can burn yourself. Then the next step would be to build some kind of a jig to lengthen this dummy pipe to make it 1 inch longer. Got to come out on exactly the right angle, the same angle as the old catalytic converter, but it's got to be 1 inch longer. So I've screwed it into my vise and made a little flange there, bolted the top end of the catalytic converter to a piece of flat iron and just clamped it on real tight so that it can stay there. And then the bottom end, I'm basically going to have it so it's perpendicular, measure it with a square. And now the great thing about this welding table is that you can weld stuff right to it. And later when you're done, you just cut it off and you grind it flat, and your surface is good to mess it up again. You only want to weld it on one side. If you go down the other side, it's going to take a lot more cutting to get off. This way I can probably knock it with a hammer and then grind the weld smooth. The more accurate you are, the less trouble you're gonna have. That's all I know for sure. Next step is to cut these off here and here. All right, so there is our flange. Now on both sides, both catalytic converters, a bolt broke off on the bottom end, And then I'm going to drill those out and just use regular bolts with nuts on them. And there we are. The part that's going in the garbage. Only thing I need off of this is to remember this is the passenger side. Now if you look in there, you see nothing but a black hole. That should be a nice cream color, almost white. But because of the coil problem and the engine misfire, there was raw fuel going through this thing. Basically the catalytic converter, the catalyst idea is that hot exhaust comes through here and it heats that up until it like burns it again. It's kind of like an afterburner. And so when you've got raw fuel going in there, that can't actually catalyze or trigger the second burn of the exhaust gases. So it's defunct. That's the thing. That seems to be drilling all right. There we go, we got that through. And that noise it makes, that's when the steel you're drilling is just about as hard as the bit that you're drilling it with. Couple of 5/16 bolts. Which way up was that? Really doesn't matter. It looks like it's the same both ways. And that will give us a perfectly aligned flange, perfectly aligned to the rest of the exhaust that heads for the back of the car. There we go. That is not budging. And up here, this other thing is definitely not budging. We got some good solid pieces to weld to now. So there's the pipes I ordered, 2 of these, a pair of these. And these are mandrel bent, which makes them consistent ID all the way through. Of course, the theory behind the bend is when you bend something like this metal has to stretch, this little metal has to compress. So that's how you end up with some kind of a weird shape or all of those little crimps along there, because that allows the metal to compress. But then the problem is that it chokes down on the inside. So I wanted this to be kind of professionally done. So I don't want it choking down on the inside. I want it to be free-flowing. Better than the catalytic converters, actually. Now, mandrel bends, basically you order the pieces that you want from a company and they probably have them in stock and there's different sizes. This is a 2.5 inch mandrel bent, total U. I mean, that's tight in there. And look at the way that shape is. It's just beautiful. And this was left over from doing my 42 Chev. 2.5 inch exhaust, dual exhaust all the way from the front, from the headers all the way to the back. And I just bought, I don't know, a bunch of different mandrel bends, and then you cut it. There's a line there where it was going to be cut at one point, right? So if you just need that much of a curve, you cut it and then you add a straight piece on here. And that's how you can build an entire exhaust system. And so this one here, all I need to do is cut it so that it'll fit both ends, both of those flanges, and it'll totally and easily replace the catalytic converter. Now a little bit of estimating with a Sharpie and a good eye. And you see this is going to come from there and it's going to go up to there. So we need to figure out how much to cut off. And it's really, a bit of a guessing game because we can't move these. If we move these now, we lose our reference points. One trick to making this a little easier is you go get your old hot dog wiener roast sticks made out of heavy wire. And there's no hot dog roast going on right now. And so we could bend this along the lines of the tube. I'm going to cut the gnarly ends off of here because they just cause confusion. Alright, so that matches the bottom side of the tube almost. You could do the top side as well, but I'd prefer to do the bottom. So that is going to ride like that. If I come more, so see what happens if you slide this way, this angle increases. You want to watch that angle, so if I come down this way, it's going to be the most accurately bang on there and straight on here. And then before any welding, make sure you clean out the inside. You don't want those pieces of furry steel left in there. And once you have a perfect fit, call me. I have a job for you. Well, I think that looks pretty good. So we'll just weld it up a bit and go for supper. Ta-da! It's gonna be good. The upstream oxygen sensor, the one closest to the engine, is not going to be modified. It's just going to go back into this stub of a pipe here and measure the oxygen content of the exhaust gas coming out of the manifold, which a car without a catalytic converter will only have one oxygen sensor here, but a car with a catalytic converter will have an oxygen sensor down here to measure the exhaust gas oxygen content once it's coming out of the catalytic converter to make sure the catalytic converter's working. So now the problem is we're going to have to trick it. And here's the trick. These little O2 sensor extenders. And you can actually use an anti-foul, spark plug anti-foul extender as well. It works kind of the same. But basically we're going to hide the O2 sensor back up in here so that it doesn't catch as much of the exhaust gas and it doesn't figure out that, hey, there's too much oxygen in this exhaust gas. So we pull this, it's already loose, we pull this O2 sensor. This is the downstream one, right? Going into the exhaust pipe, and the exhaust goes out that way to the tail end of the car. And basically all this does is go in here. It's stainless steel, so it won't rust. That's a good thing. I forget how much these cost. I think I bought them on Amazon or something. And then the O2 sensor. I'll tell you later if this really works or not. It's supposed to, though. I won't tighten that too much because I end up making it too tight. I should put some anti-lock stuff on there, but it's okay. I'll just manhandle it whenever I need to take it off again. And the final obvious step is to put all this stuff back into the car and assemble it. And of course with the gaskets that go on both ends, whatever kind of car you got, I'm sure it'll have gaskets. And it's probably a good idea to replace those, although on this car they're stinking expensive. But we'll see. I'll just keep my eyes open for something cheap, because if you're removing the catalytic converters from your car today, you want to get the thing running. But this project, It's going to be months, years maybe before the thing runs. But, you know, this is the foundational, some of the foundational stuff that we got to take care of. And one more thing, especially if you're building a hot rod or trying to succeed at anything. And, well, a haircut would be a start, wouldn't it? I made a decision when I was probably 10 or 11 years old that really changed my life. Yeah, it really did. And, you know, sometimes that happens. And that was, I grew up on a farm or a ranch in the East Kootenays. And in the valley that we lived in, there was, you know, farm after farm after farm. And several of the farms had sawmills. In fact, we still have ours. My dad and I rebuilt it a couple times, and my brother's rebuilt it since and still uses it. And all the other stuff, you know, the machinery and all that kind of stuff. And as a kid, you're trying to be like the big guys, right? You're trying to be like your dad and your uncle and your grandpa and your neighbors, you know. And you look up to these guys because they're your heroes. I mean, it's the only people we knew, right? And you're trying to fix stuff. And first of all, you got nothing for tools. And I can remember tackling, you know, rusty bolts on some old piece of farm machinery. And all I have is a pair of vice grips and a crescent wrench or something, you know. And the thing would beat me. But I can remember one day waking up and I said, you know what? Never again will I be beaten by a rusty bolt. and it's an attitude thing, right? And the people that don't succeed in building hot rods or building houses or whatever it is you're building, it's just simply because you haven't got your attitude set. And the fact is that anybody can do anything that we put our hands to and our minds to. You know, there's a lot of people with a lot more difficulties in life than I have, and maybe than you have. And, you know, we can accomplish great things. We were made to accomplish great things. And so I got up that morning and I said, you know what, Rusty Bolt, I am coming after you. And I'm not quitting until I beat you. And I did. I beat the thing. And never again has a Rusty Bolt ever beaten me. And they get stuck in some really weird places. But I don't care. I will not quit. I'll not back down. And this little nut here in this Cadillac CTS, one of the upper manifold or exhaust pipe. Okay, this was at the top of the catalytic converter. And you could not get in there. And so I took a long punch, because I could reach it with a punch, but it had to be, you know, like more than a foot long, and ground the end to a chisel point, and then stuck it down there on the side, on the edge of this bolt. And you got to be careful because you don't want to break the manifold. Then you got real trouble. But just, you know, gently whacking it. And you couldn't even see, right? You get a light in there, and you could see with one eye. So you had no depth of perception, or depth of field, right? You could only see with one eye. And so I think that's it, and you'd hit it again and hit it again. And pretty soon I got in there somehow with a mirror or whatever and looked, and sure enough, the thing's splitting apart. And yeah, so I beat it, right? And now all I have to do is, you know, clean up the threads on the stud on the top of that exhaust pipe, and then get a new nut and put it on with some never Loctite, Unloctite, whatever it is. That's what we're gonna do. Anyway, happy catalytic converter murdering. Happy hot rodding.